It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. This is our second episode of Herd Mentality this week. We started the week with Herd Mentality on Monday. We're finishing out the week with Herd Mentality on Friday. And the reason for that is just basically how the calendar has fallen, where actually last week I didn't even have an episode of Herd Mentality because we had some newsy stuff to get into. And so we kind of double dip this week. And then next week's going to be interesting because the Bills have mandatory minicamp. And so we should have media availability all 3 days. If they do 3 days, a lot of times Sean McDermott cuts it down to just the 2 days. So we should have 2 or 3 days of that next week, plus a couple of other things that I have scheduled, including a conversation with Bruce Nolan, where we're going to dive into Dalton Kincaid in depth and really break down the future outlook there. So a lot of great content to look forward to. Make sure that you are subscribed. But all that to say that I wanted to get another episode of Herd Mentality in because, you know, it might be another week, maybe a little week and a half until we get to the next one. Let's get started. The first one comes from Papa T. Papa T says, I heard you mention on one of the podcasts you do, teams starting to go moneyball with the wide receiver room. Layer that with the wide receiver one money that teams are handing out, latest being Justin Jefferson. What is your ideal percentage for cap, the wide receiver room, and a wide receiver one with respect to the Bills paying Josh Allen? My take is to draft wide receivers on day 2 and let them walk at the end of their deal if they establish themselves as wide receiver one. Pay tight ends and productive slot receivers and figure it out on the outside. You always say the game is one of the trenches. I can't see paying an outside wide receiver roughly 12.5% of the cap as a winning formula when you are paying a quarterback top dollar. For the Vikings, fantastic move with a rookie quarterback. So Papa T's definitely on board with what the Buffalo Bills are doing. Let me offer some of my perspective on all of this. First of all, it's fair to say that the wide receiver money in the NFL right now is booming, right? Justin Jefferson got $35 million a season. We saw A.J. Brown sign for $32 million a season. We've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown sign for $30.025 million per season. We've had 3 different guys reset the market this offseason alone at that position. Not to mention Jalen Waddle coming in at $28.25 million. Nico Collins got about $25 million per. Michael Pittman got the bag. Calvin Ridley got paid, right? There's some big money going to these wide receivers. And if you look at kind of the trend here, you're seeing that the top deals are coming in between 9 and 14% of the average percentage of the cap at the time of the signing. And to quote Tua Tagovailoa, because I actually really liked what he said when he was asked recently about his contract situation and how the quarterbacks are getting paid now north of $50 million per season. Tua said, the market's the market. And I agree with him. The market is the market. So you can have whatever opinion you want about paying wide receivers and if you should or should not, or if it's too much money or whatever. The market is the market. The NFL is paying these wide receivers, and they are very, it feels like, eager and willing to continuously drive the top of that market up. It's definitely happening. The market is the market. And of course, all contracts become more challenging with a paid quarterback. Now, you want to have a paid quarterback. That's the way to get to the Super Bowl, right? Paying a quarterback. It's definitely part of the formula, 100%. So that's a great problem to have, but it does make all of the rest of your contracts a little bit more difficult because of the amount going to your quarterback. Of course, the Bills in this bucket. Actually, the Bills have a pretty good bargain at quarterback in Josh Allen based on what his APY is compared to the other quarterbacks that are continuously resetting that market. I'm sure something's coming as it relates to the quarterback contract situation for Josh Allen. But yeah, the Bills are committing a lot of money to Josh Allen, even if it's not the same, mid 50s that some of these other guys are getting. But you have some teams that are paying a quarterback and receivers. Of course, the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devonta Smith. That's a pretty clear example of that. Miami's going to be in that boat. They're going to pay Tua. He's going to get a contract north of $50 million a season. They just paid Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill's already at $30 million a season. So there are teams that are willing to do this. And you also see other teams like the Bills take the moneyball approach. And maybe you can kind of see these trends and what's happening across the league, and maybe that helps you feel better about what the Bills are doing at the wide receiver position. And it's not just the Bills. Other teams are doing this as well. The Green Bay Packers, they are definitely taking the moneyball approach to wide receiver. And that's the team, and I've argued that they have the best combination of young wide receiver talent in the NFL. And it's a couple of, 2 second-round picks and 2 day 3 picks that are making that possible. The Kansas City Chiefs definitely taking a moneyball approach. The Los Angeles Chargers definitely taking a moneyball approach. So this is 100% happening. Of course, the Bills part of that conversation. So you see both sides of it. Teams that are, we'll give all the money to the wide receivers. And you see teams that are, let's see if we can be a little bit more deliberate about having a lot of depth and a lot of variety with skill sets and sharing the ball, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, every conversation that we have regarding team building in the NFL and driving the top of the markets and paying other players while you have a highly paid quarterback, it all comes back to drafting. It all comes back to drafting. Hitting on draft picks, your way to get economic players in the NFL is players on rookie deals. And the more of those that you can have contributing to your football team, the better, because that helps you fill out your roster, right? You can't pay everybody. And so having those players that can make an impact on low-cost deals is really important, and the way that you get those players is primarily through the NFL draft. So pay the players, right? Pay your best players. You should always pay your best young players. And to me, the good players are the premium, right? Like you talk about positional value, all of that. I get it. But the good players are the premium. And so, you should take care of those guys. And what it comes down to is continuing to replenish your roster and fill out your roster with quality draft picks. That's absolutely critical. But as it relates to the Bills and their cap commitments to wide receivers, they only have $16.3 million right now committed to wide receivers. That's 4th lowest in the NFL. And the range here is you have the Packers at the lowest. They have $11 million tied up to wide receivers, all the way up to Seattle at $54 million. That's the highest cap allocation to wide receivers. And truthfully, everywhere from 11 to 54, every dollar amount in between, you see teams that are paying that range, right? The teams are just all over the place with this. And as it relates to the Bills, kind of back to that, even if they are paying Josh Allen, ideally you do have cap allocation earmarked to pay a big-time wide receiver. But I do think this is more circumstantial than anything, right? I think the players that you wind up getting, how they develop, and then what their contract status is from there, it's all circumstantial. Right now, the Bills are in a position where, they are paying Stephon Diggs $30 million. That's what he's counting against the cap. Of course, they traded him away, but there is a large piece of this cap that is committed to wide receivers. Unfortunately, one of them's not on the team. So if you add in Stephon Diggs, now the Bills are paying $46 million to wide receivers this year. So to me, it's very, very circumstantial. Who's your quarterback? Are they a rookie? You see what the Bears are doing. The Bears have a rookie quarterback and 2 highly paid wide receivers and a paid tight end and a paid running back, right? So every team is a little bit different based on their own unique circumstances. And I think that it all is circumstantial. I think that if the Bills had the right opportunity come along, they would have paid a wide receiver. So again, you lean into what you have to lean into. And right now for the Bills at wide receiver, that's moneyball. It's just timing. It's timing and circumstances. Had to trade away Diggs, didn't want to pay Gabe Davis. But I think it is also important to be mindful that the Bills have invested in playmakers. It's not like they're saying, well, Josh Allen, you're paid. Go figure it out. That's not the case at all. While the cap commitment isn't large, there's not a lack of investment. The top pick that they had in the last 2 drafts is a playmaker. Their first-round pick in 2023, Dalton Kincaid, that also cost them a 4 to go get him. Keon Coleman, I know that he wasn't technically a first-round pick, 33 overall. The Bills used their top pick on that playmaker. You also have the great circumstance of Khalil Shakir as a 5th-round pick emerging for you. Dawson Knox is the 13th highest paid tight end in the NFL. Curtis Samuel wasn't a nothing contract, especially relative to the Bills' cap situation entering this offseason. And then you kind of fill in the blanks with a couple of veteran flyers like a Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a Chase Claypool, a Matt Collins. So you can see how this comes together, but I think it's less intentional than it is circumstantial and taking the opportunities that you have at that moment in time to make it work. And I think that's kind of why the Bills are in the spot that they're in. All right, I talked way longer about that than I expected. So let me tell you about eBay, and then we'll get into Dalton Kincaid and his overall value economically to this football team. So be sure to stick with us. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, the next one here comes from Tyler. I was hoping to answer this immediately after the first one because they kind of go hand in hand, but I went off on that last question. So Tyler says, with the new contract extension for Justin Jefferson, if Dalton Kincaid goes on to have a historic 4-year run with the Bills, what do you think the type of money will be for tight ends, and when do you think that will start to catch up with the money that's going to wide receivers? With tight end becoming more of an offensive skill position with players like Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, and other tight ends when will other tight ends become closer to getting the big time number of contracts? All right, so you hear a lot about this from Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen, outstanding NFL tight end. I think he was actually the first ever tight end in the history of the NFL to have 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. He's come on to be the best color commentator in football, in my opinion. If Greg Olsen's calling a football game, I'm dialed in on what he has to say. He's terrific. But he's talked about this. He's like, these tight ends were asked to block like offensive linemen. We're asked to catch passes like wide receivers, and we don't get paid anything like what they get paid. The top of the market. It's not similar at all. And it just hasn't accelerated like other positions. I think tight end and cornerback are the 2 positions that I look at across the NFL, and the way that the top of that market has accelerated just doesn't really compare to the rest of the NFL. And it's not because of a lack of options with the tight end position. We've had really good tight ends across the NFL of late. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert. Of course, we saw Greg Olsen and Jason Witten really redefine the position throughout the last decade or 2 decades. And Travis Kelce just signed an extension at $17.125 million per season. Darren Waller's at 17. TJ Hawkinson just signed his deal at 16.5 per season. George Kittle's at 15. Mark Andrews is at 14. So while the top of the wide receiver market is now at $35 million APY, the top tight ends are just barely, a little over half of that. You've only got 3 tight ends in the NFL right now making more than $35 million, or it's more than $15 million a season. And that's where it becomes exciting to consider Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid has obviously the skill set that he has and the impact that he'll have on the team, but should he become this elite caliber tight end that drives the top of the market, that's going to be a whole lot cheaper than a wide receiver being your go-to option in the passing game. Because if you have elite production from a wide receiver, those guys are going to get $30 million or more a season. That's just not where the tight ends are at. And so there's a lot of value there. Now, your question is more specific. Okay, well, if Dalton Kincaid becomes one of these elite tight ends, what does that contract look like? Well, first of all, he's not extension eligible until after 2026. And so what does the tight end market look like in 2026, 2027? That's where you have to focus yourself to get the answer here. And so other tight ends that are coming up in terms of their contracts and guys that could drive the top of the market, of course, Sam Laporta. And that'll be an interesting parallel to monitor between Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid. I think Sam Laporta is in an advantage to Dalton Kincaid because he wasn't a first-round pick, right? He's a second-round pick, so there's no fifth-year option. So I think the urgency to get that deal done after year 3 might be higher than with Dalton Kincaid because the Bills will have, of course, the 4th year of his rookie deal plus the 5th-year option that they could tap into so they could buy themselves some time. So that's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out. You're seeing Trey McBride really emerge for the Arizona Cardinals, Jake Ferguson, Kyle Pitts with the Falcons, Pat Freiermuth, and then some other guys, Cade Otton, Chiga Okonkwo, Isaiah Likely. These are the players that are going to drive the top of this market. But I don't know that they're going to drive it significantly. If Kincaid and Laporta and McBride wind up being like the top of the tight ends in the NFL, I mean, are we going to get to 20 million? I think it's probably more likely that it's 18 and a half, 19, maybe pushing 20. But I think that 17 to 20 range is where I'd expect Dalton Kincaid to be in 3-4 years when it's time for him to get that extension. But again, we could see $40 million a year wide receivers by that point in time. And so there's still going to be a lot of value in your primary weapon in the passing game, your number one guy being a tight end for the economic benefits that come with that. The next one here comes from Joseph. Joseph says, we've seen the Bills sign a few wildcard spots on the 90-man roster of low-risk, potentially high-reward players like Gable Steveson, Travis Clayton, and Frank Gore Jr. What are the chances any of these players or other players you could see fit in that category actually make the roster? And can you name players in the past who were seen as unlikely to make the team but ended up having a big impact? So let me answer this. Let me take some liberty with this. I want to have 2 different buckets of players that I mentioned. I want to get into players that have never played college football or for the most part never played football in their life prior to being in the NFL, guys that went on to have success, because now the Bills are doubling down on players that have never played football before that are on their 91-man roster, of course, in the drafting of Travis Clayton and the signing of Gable Steveson. And then I want to get into long shot players like undrafted free agents that went on to make, have an impactful career for the Buffalo Bills. So here we go. Players to not play college football, or for the most part, not football at all prior to having NFL success. I got a list for you. We'll start with Jordan Mailata, current left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, never played football, rugby player in Australia. He's certainly one of the top 10 best left tackles in the NFL right now. F.A. Obata, he played for the Bills, currently on Washington, started his career with the Carolina Panthers. He's entering his 8th season as an NFL defensive end. He's played in 74 games. Is he an elite player? No, but he's been at least a quality depth player for a number of years after never playing football. Michael Lewis played, most of his career for the New Orleans Saints, 1 year with the 49ers, 2001 to 2007, played 1 year in high school, 7 years in the NFL, was an all-pro kick returner, had 4 career kick return touchdowns, was a kick returner and a punt returner for the Saints, and was really good. Antonio Gates, enough said there, never played football, Hall of Fame tight end. Should have been first ballot Hall of Famer, but there's that. Stephen Neal's an interesting one. 10-year player in the NFL for the New England Patriots, played 1 season of high school football, was a college wrestler, and wound up starting 81 games across 10 seasons in the NFL for the Patriots. He won 3 Super Bowls, was on the team from 2002 to 2010. Ray Seals played 1 year in the Empire Football League, and then 7 years in the NFL with the Bucs, Steelers, and Panthers from 89 to 97. Played defensive line, 90 games and 62 starts. I think he had like 34, 35 career sacks. And then the last guy I'll mention is Vince Papale, right? We all watched the movie Invincible. 1 year of high school football, wound up playing 41 games for the Eagles across 3 seasons. So you do have some players that have never played college football, or for the most part football in their life, and went on to have NFL success. So is it unlikely that Gable Steveson or Travis Clayton will be meaningful NFL players? Yeah, it's extremely unlikely. but it's not impossible. And obviously both those guys have crazy athleticism that gets you excited. The other part of this was long shots to make an impact for the Bills. This was off the top of my head. This is what I came up with. Jason Peters, undrafted free agent out of Arkansas, tight end. The Bills converted to offensive line. He'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Pat Williams, undrafted free agent. That dude was one of my favorite Buffalo Bills of all time. Just an absolute monster at defensive tackle. George Wilson, wide receiver at, was it Arkansas he played at? And he comes to the Bills, converts to safety, and winds up being a pretty good starter for a number of years. Fred Jackson, long shot of long shots, one of the Bills' all-time most productive running backs. Lorenzo Alexander, undrafted free agent, was a 300-pound defensive tackle, winds up becoming a good edge rusher. Nickel Roby-Coleman became a really good slot player in the NFL. Jabari Greer, really good corner. Probably had his best years with the Saints, but was a good player for the Bills. He might have had an even longer career if he didn't have a couple of ACL tears, but Jabari Greer was a good cornerback. Jim Leonard, UDFA safety, wound up having a really productive NFL career, and now he's in the coaching ranks. And how about Jerry Ostrowski, the Big O, our guy, was a 10th round draft pick by the Chiefs, gets cut, comes to the Bills, goes on to start 102 games. So there's some guys that have done that. All right, got plenty more to get to. I want to talk about the kickoff rule and some of the new ideas coming out about the kickoff piece of it, and maybe you don't want your kicker to do that. We'll talk about Sedrick Van Pran Granger, a little linebacker duel, and what's up with the intro. We're going to get into all of that here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. All right, folks, the next one here comes from Daniel. Daniel says, really curious on your thoughts regarding the idea of a kickoff specialist given the new kickoff rules. Hearing what Kansas City special team coordinator said about not wanting to expose their kicker to tackling and thinking about using another player as a kickoff specialist is interesting. Do you think that has merit? If so, I imagine you want someone truly dedicated to the craft. The question becomes, is there room on the roster for Bass, Ferguson, Martin, and Browning, assuming Browning is your kickoff specialist guy? All right, I'm excited to talk about this. First of all, I don't think you're going to have an actual kickoff specialist. I think you want to have a player, right, a defensive player or a wide receiver that can kick and tackle, right? That's what you're concerned about. There's really very little kicking skill required with this new kickoff rule. So let's break this down. Whenever this rule came through, and I've done an entire podcast on the kickoff rule. If you'd like to hear me really talk about it, go back and find it. But when this rule was announced, I tweeted out, your favorite NFL team's kicker should probably start brushing up on their tackling skills, because I just kind of saw the nature of the play and figured that kickers are going to be a lot more involved with the tackles. And this kickoff deal is a big deal. I think I've said this before, but like fundamentally, this is the biggest rule change that has happened in the NFL in my lifetime. It is going to have a major impact on explosive kick returns, average starting field position. It's huge. There's no more fair catches. Like, there's going to be kick returns. And your kicker is going to be involved with making tackles. And not only making tackles, but leveraging the return from depth, not only to position themselves to make a tackle, but to be that last line of defense that maybe kind of funnels the return more towards where the bodies are. So you basically would ideally like to have a safety, a true safety, being that guy. You're not just going to get some other guy that kicks balls. Like, that's not what's important. Because the kicking piece of this is now hang time does not matter. It's completely irrelevant. Does not matter even a lick. You just have to land the ball between the goal line and the 20-yard line. So can you be accurate enough to put it in that space? Because hang time, again, does not matter. Now, directionally, there's probably some advantages to being able to directionally kick the ball. But if you kick the ball out of bounds, they get the ball at the 40. If you kick a touchback, they get the ball at the 35. You're not just going to give up the 35. That's too much. So you better be able to cover these kicks and tackle. And your kicker is going to be part of that equation. So it's not about Jack Browning as a 5'11", 190-pound kicker/punter. That's not going to move the needle here for me as a kickoff specialist. What would move the needle for me is if you told me DeMar Hamlin could kick off or Cole Bishop could kick off. or Cam Lewis can kick off, or Chase Claypool, or whatever player. Like, those are the types of guys. You need a guy that can actually tackle to kick off. So step one, can you land the ball between the goal line and the 20-yard line? Step two, can you tackle? You know the answer to that for Tyler Bass or Jack Browning or Sam Martin is no, they can't tackle. And Dave Tube, the Chiefs special teams coordinator, he estimates that 25 to 40% of all kickoffs are going to involve the kicker as part of the tackle, whether that's making the tackle or being part of like leveraging and influencing that return back to where the help is. It's a big deal. And so, again, which position player, which athlete that can tackle can also land the ball between the goal line and the 20-yard line. That's what you're looking for. And then it's an added benefit if there's a directional ability there, because you'd like to be able to angle it certain ways, I'm sure. But if you kick the ball out of bounds, I mean, they're getting the ball at the 40. It's a huge, huge rule change. Huge. Chris says, should we read anything into the fact that Connor McGovern is listed as a guard on the Bills website, while Van Pran Granger is a guard/center and Will Clapp is a guard/center? The player they say will be starting center isn't even listed as a center. I think this is just an administrative error. Both the players you mentioned, Will Clapp and Sedrick Van Pran Granger, are new players. And so I'm sure there's an administrative process. Whoever updates the website has to go in, add the player, and put their position. And so because they're new players to the team, I'm sure that they were told what to put in. Connor McGovern as a returning player, I'm sure nobody's had the thought to be like, oh, yeah, we should probably change this or not change this. I think that's what it comes down to, is those are new players that part of the administrative process would tell them to go do this. And I'm sure that nobody's probably going back and checking other players to switch their positions around. But I will say, Sedrick Van Pran Granger is the guy that can wreck this idea of Connor McGovern to center, David Edwards to left guard, because there could be a path where either Sedrick Van Pran's the center and Connor McGovern stays at left guard, or Connor McGovern is the center and Sedrick Van Pran Granger beats out David Edwards to be the left guard. I'm keeping an eye on him. You saw Eric Wood. Eric Wood recently said on Twitter that he took the time to watch Van Pran Granger's tape. He's really impressed. Has no idea outside of measurables how he lasted to the 5th round. Like I'm telling you, this guy's tape is clean. His tape is clean. He can play. And so I think it's just a matter of when it makes sense for him to become part of the starting 5. I've said this. I think he can be the Khalil Shakir of this draft class. Chris says, and this is not a question that he submitted for Herd Mentality, but I always enjoy chatting with Chris. And Chris asked me a lot of good questions that provoke a lot of good thought in my mind. And this is what he said, and so I wanted to highlight it here for Herd Mentality. He said, if you were the Buffalo Bills and you had to choose who makes the practice squad as an undrafted free agent linebacker, who would you choose between Shane Simon and Joe Andreessen? And, of course, Shane Simon, the recent signing out of Pitt, started his career at Notre Dame. Andreessen from UB, played one season at UB, was outstanding, and played at a smaller school prior to that for a few seasons. And I think this is probably a very accurate question. I think this is an actual decision that the Bills are going to have to make. Which of those two guys do you keep on your practice squad? I lean into Andreessen. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't watched any film on either player. But Andreessen is a guy that is a better athlete, right? So he's better athleticism. So that's important. But then on top of that, Shane Simon had an opportunity at Notre Dame and Pitt. Okay, those are big-time schools. And he didn't really move the needle, right? Didn't get invited to the NFL Scouting Combine. Wasn't really signed as an undrafted free agent. I mean, he had to try out for the Bills, and then weeks later, he gets signed to a contract. Andreessen, kind of a smaller path, right? Where small school, goes to UB, has a big year, tryout, signs a contract. I think that there's been less opportunity and more potential as it relates to Andreessen, and so that would be where I would lean into this thing. Our last one today, Brian says, what happened to the old intro theme music? After years of listening to the podcast on a daily basis, I have been conditioned to activate the Bills section of my brain when the guitar riff starts and that lady tells me I'm locked in. I feel my performance as a listener is suffering, and I'm no longer the best version of myself. Where do we go from here? Appreciate the question, Brian. So the cool thing about working for Locked On is I have a ton of creative control over this podcast. I get to talk about what I want, frame it how I want to. It's, my ability to just be creative with what I want to discuss is 100% in my control. But it's still a network, right? It's a network of over 200 podcasts, and really, really proud to be part of it. It's a really big network, and it's awesome. But they tell me, all right, it's time to change the intro. And they said, to your point, I mean, for years I had the same intro. And so for every podcast, it wasn't just Locked On Bills. Every single podcast was sent like 15, 20 different options, and you get to pick one. So I did what I was asked to do. And so I think they wanted to kind of freshen up on that. Hopefully if you're watching on YouTube, the video is a little bit better. But it's not the same. I try to pick something that still was kind of guitar and drum driven, but the network said it's time for a new intro. They gave me options. I picked one, and was out of my hands. I like the old intro. I like this new one a little bit because it's a little tighter. It's not as long, and so I can get into the content, more time to talk. So if there's a silver lining here, but network initiative, and this will be the intro until they tell me it's time for a new intro. So hopefully we can all recalibrate our brains a little bit. And when you hear this intro now, it will activate that Bills section of your brain, and we can get locked back in. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Next week's going to be a loaded week. We got mandatory OTAs. I've got 3 other podcasts lined up that I'm pretty excited about, including that conversation with Bruce Nolan. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.